There is an intelligence, and I'm not speaking about a operative creature up there or out there somewhere doing things and deciding things, but there's an intelligence in nature and creation that if we ignore, we create suffering for ourselves and other people. And aligning with that intelligence and aligning with that connection is really what, whether we do so consciously or whether we do so because we're called to do that in ways that manifest compassion and connection and love. That's the way we're meant to be.
There are lots of ways to explore your inner self, explore consciousness. And some of the ancient ways is with yoga. And so there's a yoga for your spirit, there's a yoga for your heart, there's a yoga for your will, and there's a yoga for your body. Hatha yoga is by doing postures and breathing. It's very powerful because Hatha yoga actually works through the blocks in your body by breathing into them. It takes years, but you actually breathe life force into all the hurts and wounds and pressures and pains that's in the body. And then eventually the body becomes saturated with life force that you put in there. It's a very, very powerful. It's the only yoga that actually proclaims that if you do it long enough, you can reach immortality, so that the body does not actually die. And then there's Kundalini yoga. When I did that one video with Gabriel Morris, the emotional wounds are like bullets. And here was a guy who was obviously had his Kundalini awakened, and he was a fully awakened human being, and he says, you still have to do your shadow work. And that's kind of like the lower three chakras and your will, your emotional body. But you still have to do your shadow work even after you've become fully aware and saturated with Kundalini energy. And then all the gurus, they talk about doing meditation, which brings light into your consciousness, opens your third eye. And I've been lucky enough to have met like 4 different enlightened men in my life. And one was a really well-known, famous guru. And this guy had some power. He was fully enlightened human being. There's no question about that. But he got married. And after a few years of being married, his wife didn't, he wasn't relating to her, in the right way. She wasn't a devotee and she wasn't the wife. So he didn't know what to do. And eventually he had to do his he had to change. He had to change himself. Or else his wife would have left him and they had kids and all that stuff. So even an enlightened master has to do shadow work. You have to do that dark night of the soul, really look within and find out where your blocks are and find out what's holding you back from being sort of a well-balanced person, instead of being just a spiritual badass or a spiritual asshole or an enlightened jerk. Because it's really about heart. When it comes to heart, there's not a lot of yogas that really concentrate on the heart. But the spirit, which is up here, and like the spirit energy and the Kundalini energy, when they're supposed to come together and balance. And if they balance properly, you have what's called unity consciousness. That means the entire universe is balanced in your heart. So whenever you hear people talk about unity consciousness, and that's what it is. It's not so dramatic and it's not so driven as enlightenment of either the Kundalini or Raja Yoga, the spirit side yoga. But it is probably the most human and profound thing there is. This your separation between you and all things. All conflicts are over. And so this next little clip is Craig Holliday, and he's one of these people. He teaches about unity consciousness, and he's had Kundalini awakening. And what he says in this video is absolutely true. If you're going to explore consciousness, if you're a living human being, you need to do your shadow work. You need to do the dark dance of the dark night of the soul. Because if that's not happening, then you'll be using your meditation or your exploration as a way to deny your feelings, or to go past your feelings, or to hide from your feelings, or to run away from your feelings. And this makes you a fragmented person, and you're not whole, and you'll be a fake, you'll be a spiritual jerk or a spiritual know-it-all or whatever it is that you're trying to cover up. But what's nice about duality is that non-dual people, they don't hide anything, they have anything to hide. Everything is as it is. Very nice state to be in. So I really like Craig Holliday. I asked him if I could make this video, and he said yes. I really like his approach because it's very heart-centered, very authentic, and very kind. So, Craig Holliday, the total embrace of darkness as a path to liberation.
In a real sense, being an explorer of consciousness is an incredible life. I think one of the things that Yogananda once said is that when you look within, there's thousands and thousands of universes within us. And so, for me, one of the most important things is that when we're going inward, when we're investigating and opening to these worlds within us, that yes, it's wonderful to open into new worlds of bliss, new realms of spaciousness and emptiness, even realms of the falling away of the self, that it's so important to step into these spaces. But simultaneously, I find it maybe even sometimes more important to look within ourselves and find all the different psychological blocks within us, all the different shadows within our consciousness. Because to me, one of the things I learned very, very early on in the spiritual path was that I could open to these incredible states of peace and bliss. But then there was times later in the day when I couldn't even get down on my knees and acknowledge what my daughter needed. So what was it within me that I needed to look at? What aspects of my conditioned self did I need to shine the light of awareness into? And so for many years I've always been curious about how these different shadows within us, how these different aspects of our conditioned sense of self, how they eclipse our own divinity, our own beauty, and how that beauty manifests itself in the world. And so for me, I've been a big fan of, and I think that's where most of the work that I do is with individuals, and just sitting down with them and shining the light of awareness into those dark places, and in a real sense, being an explorer, exploring the realms of our psyche, exploring things in our outward life which don't work. And we can find different places within ourselves which are tight, which are tense, where we're holding on to this or that. But to be willing to open to those places within us from an open heart, from a place of spaciousness and clarity, and always compassion. And from this space of compassion, can we look at these shadows? Can we see how perhaps, the way our father treated us or our mother treated us is getting in the way of us seeing clearly and being a more loving presence in the world? Can we see that our educational conditioning gets in the way of how we experience and relate to reality? Can we see that there's these various wounds within us that are just begging us to come forward, to be met with love and released? And so very much what's required is this total embrace of darkness. For there to be true liberation within us, there has to be this willingness within us to go to the very places within us which we don't want to go, which we've been afraid to go. You know, I found out early on that, well, as a kid I grew up in a house with a father who was very grumpy, treated us, you know, like we were all his little soldiers. And what I found is I developed all this anger within me. So many times in the beginning of the spiritual path, I would sit there. For years, this anger would just come forward into my consciousness, and I just felt like if I could out-meditate the anger, then I would be free. But many years later, my approach changed into the sense of being willing to walk into the anger, to drop into it, to feel into it and experience it. And as I did, that anger began to move, it began to open, it began to release. And a funny thing happened. The anger began to shift into the direct experience of power, the direct experience of being embodied. And I thought, oh, how wonderful this is. Walking into this place which I was once afraid of, which I deeply wanted to avoid, and to find this experience of power, to find an experience of deep integration. And so it's an incredible thing for us to be willing to open these doors within ourselves, to explore all the different aspects of our psyche, to explore the different aspects of our wound, to allow them to heal, to allow these energies within us to transform, to release, to be liberated. And then what we'll find is it's much easier, greatly easier, to experience greater worlds of bliss, of openness, of peace, of intelligence, more greater and fuller non-dual realities will become permanent states within us if we're willing first to explore all the aspects of ourselves, which we've been trying so desperately to avoid.
But there's an intelligence in nature and creation that if we ignore, we create suffering for ourselves and other people.